Hey everyone, welcome to another G News podcast. Today we are very lucky to be joined by Rachel Boyack, and Rachel is Labour's spokesperson for Oceans and Fisheries, Arts, Heritage and Culture, and Rachel is the elected MP for Nelson since 2020. She's also the spokesperson for Animal Welfare. Hey Rachel, and welcome to G News.
Oh, kia ora, Gerard. It's really awesome to be here and lovely to be here on beautiful Waiheke Island.
That's so good to have you here as well. I see you've decided to wear a pink pantsuit for us.
Yeah, I just thought we needed to maybe revive, pink pantsuits. They get a bit of a bad rap, but I love my pink pantsuit.
It's classic. Thank you. Okay, so let's start with oceans and fisheries. The Hauraki Marine Area Protection Bill. It's been compromised by this government kind of at the 11th hour. What's going on there, and what are we really seeing happening?
Can I just begin by acknowledging everybody here in Tamaki Makaurau who have worked so hard for many people over a decade to actually get to this point. So the Hauraki Golf Bill that was introduced by Labour a couple of years ago is the culmination of a lot of people's hard work. So I think that really needs to be acknowledged. The bill is likely to pass in a couple of weeks, and it is still going to be a success. It's still going to be something worth celebrating. But what we've seen is the government undermine and weaken the bill just in the last few months. It reported back from Select Committee unanimously about a year ago. National had promised to accelerate the bill, but instead we're nearly 2 years into the cycle and it's coming back with some changes. Those specific changes is that about three ringnet fishers will be allowed to continue their fishing in two of the high protection areas. And so what that means is that those two HPAs will be compromised. And it's actually for a really low economic return. So it's been estimated at being about $14,000 worth of value to those fishers. We voted against those amendments, so has the Green Party, so has Te Pāti Māori, but we will vote for the bill because the bill is a huge improvement on what we currently have here in the Hauraki Gulf.
Okay. So the halo effect, I've heard about this, where if you can just let these high protection zones alone for a while, then the fish begin to spread into the surrounding areas. But this whole idea of going in there and actually, ringnet fishing in those areas, these are high protection zones. It's a total compromise. I mean, is this madness or what?
I think it's total madness because it has a massive biodiversity impact, a negative biodiversity impact, and it will stop that area replenishing as fast as it could. What was really interesting is that the cabinet paper that the Conservation Minister Tama Potaka wrote himself actually said that there could be other areas for these ringnet fishers to go and fish without having a large impact on the fishers. So they could have actually picked up their fishing, moved it to somewhere else that wasn't in one of the high protection areas. Yet after some lobbying of Shane Jones by industry at the 11th hour, we've ended up with this compromise.
Wow. Bottom trawling. It's featured really strongly in David Attenborough's Oceans film that many of our audience would have watched. And it's one of the most destructive forms of fishing. We're trying to ban it all over the world. Many countries have taken action. What's the story in our region of the world? Where's New Zealand at? What's going on with bottom trawling?
Yeah, so look, we know that bottom trawling can have really destructive impacts both on the sea floor and so what that does in terms of the biodiversity and also how the sea floor is constructed to be able to support, an abundant fishery, but it also leads to a huge amount of bycatch. And so, fishery stock that gets fished that shouldn't be. And so for us, for example, Hector's Maui dolphin is a particular species that we know can get caught up in some of these practices. Bottom trawling does happen in New Zealand, and the challenge, the genuine challenge is, there are a lot of jobs that are reliant on, the fisheries industry. So as well as being the spokesperson, I'm also MP for Nelson, and we have a huge fishery sector with a lot of fish processing. My view is that we need to continue to take steps to step away from this practice. And one of the things we need is improved technology, so that basically companies can start to fish in different ways. So it's different practices in terms of how they're, pulling in large volume of fish, but also improved technology that can help reduce collecting bycatch in the first place. One of the things Labor did was introduced cameras on boats, and what that's done is actually showed us the level of bycatch that exists, and it's been large, right? More than what was initially told to us. And so what the purpose of that is actually to encourage companies to invest in other forms of technology. It's not an easy thing to do, and I think we have to be mindful this isn't something that can just get stopped overnight.
So, with regard to cameras on boats, there's been a recent law change around official information at requests, where the public can no longer actually see what's going on trawlers, what's going on with bycatch, and there's also been an increase in the amount of time and catch limits. This is all again Shane Jones who's been pushing this through. So what's the story there, and is this a case of sustainability coming second to commercial interests and conservation principles going out the window?
Yes, so the legislation hasn't actually been introduced yet. So the minister has announced his plans for reform, but we actually still to see the legislation. In terms of cameras on boats, the concern has been raised around privacy of workers on the boats who might have their images used for videos and things like that. Now, actually, as a Labor Party politician, I can accept and understand that. However, you also get to see the bycatch. So, talking to people who've been advocating for better protection for Maui dolphin, actually seeing that on the cameras, I think is really important. So this is a discussion we'll be having at Select Committee. I think there's probably things you could do with the use of AI to actually protect the privacy of the workers while still being transparent around what's on the camera footage. So it's a very live discussion. But look, I think the minister does want to support, commercial interests over sustainability. I think that is what he wants to do. And it's actually up to the National Party to stand up to that. We know that within the National Party and within the National Party support, say here in Auckland, there's a huge amount of support for recreational fishing and for more sustainability of fishing. And I think National need to be standing up to the minister a little bit more.
When it comes to art, culture and heritage, we've seen $2 million cuts come out of the budget, which translates to $8 million over 4 years. What's been the impact of those funding cuts on the gig economy?
Oh, so if you look at arts in totality, my biggest concern is actually the narrative that's being driven around arts in New Zealand. And this is something that's happening internationally. So using derogatory language about arts and artists and not acknowledging the important role that the arts have to play in who we are as a nation and our well-being and economically. In terms of the gig economy, I think there's still real challenges as we emerge from COVID. The impact on the hospitality sector, for example, has been really devastating, and then that flows on to musicians. What I'm seeing is just, I guess, concern from artists and creators. They don't want to put their heads above the parapet. It's a growing industry, so it's actually an industry that had growth in its GDP. So in my view, it's one that should be supported. So where the government's going a bit wrong is they've put a draft strategy out for the arts, which actually has some really good goals in it. And they've talked about growing jobs in the creative sector. But at the same time, a lot of the education programs that help train people are being cut. I had a really good meeting with Creative New Zealand this morning where we talked at length around the importance of education in the arts to train future artists, but also just for teaching people how to be creative. In the world we're going to have tomorrow and today, we need young people to have really creative minds and to be thoughtful and thinking. And so that's what the arts can do. But we've also seen cuts to history programs. So a whole lot of historians losing their jobs at the Ministry for Culture and Heritage, who maintain, our dictionaries, but Te Ara, which is the New Zealand encyclopedia. It's a really important resource, particularly for schools. and it captures our history. And Paul Goldsmith himself is a historian, yet his cuts have led to these roles being cut, and I think that has a detrimental effect on how we capture New Zealand's history, particularly at the moment. Like, we're living in this world of global chaos, and young people actually having the resources to learn our history is an important part of how we continue to build social cohesion, like here in New Zealand. And I think history plays such an important role in that.
Yeah, it's been a huge level of cuts. It's something like 80% of the historians
Yes.
in culture and heritage that are down the road.
Yeah.
And recently I interviewed Vincent O'Malley, historian, who wrote that this is a war on history. What do you think about that?
Oh, it seems that way. And, when you've got elements of the government also pushing back on some of the, history in schools that we put in place around New Zealand history and getting, a proper understanding of New Zealand history. Young people need to learn our history.
Yeah.
And so you actually need people who are recording that and digitizing it and making sure it's up to date and refreshed. It's really important. And that's a role of government. Government has a role to play there. It shouldn't just be left to the private sector.
Legislation's being drafted to bring back this controversial export of live animals, and it's stuck somewhere in cabinet at the moment. What's Labor's position on the live export of animals overseas by ship, and what can we do about it?
Well, we introduced the ban. So in 2023, that took effect, and so that banned the live export of cattle by ship, and we're really proud to do that. And we've been really clear. A year ago, we announced we would reinstate the ban. So if they do manage to bring back this horrible practice, we will reinstate the ban. But at the moment, we're actually trying to stop it from happening altogether. And we know there's no way they can reinstate this practice with improved animal welfare. And, we had the horrific situation with a ship that sunk off New Zealand, that left New Zealand shores with, thousands of cattle were killed, 41 sailors were killed. We've also seen all those images of cows in muck up to their knees, and it's just, horrific conditions. Animals having huge injuries, injuries to their feet, cattle having to be euthanized on shore, on the ship, not having enough feed. There's huge animal welfare issues. And again, this is actually something that National promised to reinstate. They said they'd improve the animal welfare. It's just not possible. So it is getting stuck at cabinet. It's not making its way through the process. I think it's because the advice they would have received is there's actually no way you can do this without giving each cow on the ship a significant amount of space, which makes it uneconomic.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So still on animal welfare, what's going on in South Auckland with all the dogs and dogs roaming free and dogs actually coming to a bad ending? What's happening there, Rachel? What's going on?
So we've unfortunately seen a huge increase in the number of dogs that we have across New Zealand, but it's particularly bad in parts of Auckland, actually in parts of Northland and a few other parts of the country like Rotorua, Porirua. And so we've just got dogs that are not desexed and they're continuing to breed. And in some situations, dogs are being dumped. So litters of puppies. People are having dogs dumped on them. So a friend might bring around a dog that they need to get rid of. We've got a lot of dogs who are chained and continuing to produce, litter after litter of puppies. It's awful. It's horrible. And a lot of these dogs aren't being trained properly. And so when they are picked up by the pound, they're not able to be rehomed. But unfortunately, a lot of dogs that could be rehomed are actually being euthanized. And it's just horrific. It's unsafe for people as well if you've got dogs roaming that are really aggressive. And so I've attended meetings in Auckland with people who are really scared to walk their kids to school because of, the number of unsafe dogs. So I've been working with Auckland Council and also my South Auckland colleagues like Arana Williams and Jenny Salesa and Lamonga Lydia Sosene. We've been working on what are some legislative tools we could use to support the council to actually reduce that population down. We've got these animal welfare organisations in Auckland who are exhausted. So they're getting litter after litter dumped on them, are having to find fosters, having to feed them, having to take them to the vet, in the middle of the night, go and pick up a litter of little puppies. Some of them don't survive. And they are just overwhelmed and exhausted. So I'm a bit of a crazy dog lady. And I've got 2 rescue dogs myself. And, I just hate the idea that there's so many dogs out there without a loving home. And there's a really easy fix. We just need to do more desexing. So Auckland Council is working on some projects at the moment. I've been to visit them. They're doing some great work, but it needs to be lifted up. They need to scale that up, do a lot more of it. And they need a few legislative tools, which I'm just working on at the moment.
Great. Let's talk about putting lives at risk. Let's talk about Nelson Hospital, specifically earthquake risks and your ICU and theatres. What's happened around the building that you've got and the current government and what path they have decided to take when it comes to protecting those vital health resources should there be an earthquake?
Oh, this is just a devastating story and situation for Nelson. I don't think the rest of the country really understands how bad Nelson Hospital is. And, sometimes when you're a small regional centre, people from outside of that centre don't actually have a good idea of just how bad it is. So we've got 2 buildings that are earthquake prone, but not just that, they're really run down. They're leaky, they're mouldy, they're damp, the layout's terrible. We don't have enough beds, and we've got an ageing, growing population in Nelson, and so the buildings are just in a horrendous state. We had a plan for 1 large new building, so wouldn't have been quite as big as Dunedin, but it was a large building that housed all of the services that needed to be housed, and National cancelled it. So they've cancelled it, and now they've promised us half a hospital. So they're putting a new building in place for beds and increasing the number of beds. They're not moving those critical parts of the hospital into a building that's going to be able to survive an alpine fault rupture, for example. So that's our ICU, it's our theatres and our emergency department. They're going to stay where they are. Now, they're not earthquake prone, but what they're not is they're not able to withstand a very large earthquake and be operational. And actually the hospital's located right by a fault line. So it's really critical, and I'm freaking angry about it because, it didn't need to happen. Like, we looked at that option of staging the development, so doing the first building and then a few years later doing a second building, and we rejected it. And the reason we rejected it is that it wasn't the clinically preferred option. So from my point of view, if clinicians are saying this is the best option, that's what you should fight for. And my dad was a public health chief executive, so he built Palmerston North Hospital. He had a big fight to build more than what was needed, but he fought and he won. And when we've talked about it, he said, Rachel, you have to fight for the best outcome because you're going to need it into the future. So, not giving up the fight, but I'm gutted. I'm gutted because, I've read the cabinet papers that show that the option we chose was the best one. And now we're just going to get half the hospital. And there's no plan from National about when they will then build a new building for those critical services like the ICU, like the emergency department, and like the theatres. I've talked to Aisha Verrill and Chris Hipkins about this and what we want to do, because the other issue, right, is that if National has made enough progress on their half a hospital, we can't just go in and knock it down and start again. We can't have this backtracking back and forth stuff. That would also be really damaging, but we would have to make a plan to get that second building up as fast as we can. And that's what we're committed to doing. We're not going to let it sit there with no timeline, no date on it. It needs to be planned for, and there needs to be a promise made to do it. We just haven't seen that from National, and I'm genuinely gutted that we've basically been shafted, and, also frustrated that there probably hasn't been enough strength of voice from some leaders in the local committee to actually stand up for what's best for Nelson. And, as the local MP, even though I'm red and I'm Labour, I'll go up against my colleagues to stand up for what's best for Nelson, and that's what people should do, put their party colours aside and fight for the region you live in.
Yeah. So let's keep talking about risking lives. When it comes to hiring freezes inside Nelson Hospital, um, can you explain to us where that level of approval went to within Health New Zealand, and what the disconnect there is between Health New Zealand and the hospital clinicians that are saying we can't hire, and somebody else out there in Health New Zealand or the National Party saying there's no hiring freeze. We don't, as a public, quite understand how there can be this gap between the two sides. There is a hiring freeze or there isn't. And what are the consequences of just not hiring the staff that we need?
Yeah, we don't get it. It's there's been a hiring freeze, and the National tried to claim there wasn't. There clearly was. What we know at Nelson and a lot of other hospitals is that the hiring decisions had to go back to the centre before they could be made locally. And we've just had this review into Nelson Hospital, which has shown some massive gaps in some of the clinical roles, but we have no plan to fix it. So the report came out and said, we can see there's some issues, particularly around registrars, and so actually having enough junior doctors and enough doctors at certain levels of the hospital system, so that you're actually getting. So what you end up having is senior doctors stepping in to do the work of junior doctors. So you actually need the right number of doctors at each level of the hospital. So we haven't had that, and we've also got an issue with not enough nurses, not enough administrative staff. So what the review also showed was not enough administrative staff to support the frontline delivery. And so there's been this huge, demonising of back office staff. But I had, a person come to see me about this who does all of the booking systems. So she's an admin staffer, books people in for their appointments, and she was going on leave and wasn't being replaced. Now, So you can demonise back office staff, but if you don't have back office staff to book people in for surgeries, how the heck are people actually going to deliver the health services we need? So this demonising of back office staff who actually do this important work to support your doctors and your nurses to do the delivery, it's just, it's so short-sighted.
Can you give us some examples of people that have contacted you or you're aware of who live in the region who have been needing some kind of medical treatment or intervention or service or surgery and haven't been able to get it because of delays and a lack of staffing levels?
I mean, how long have you got?
Give us two or three.
Okay, so the first is the case of Daniel Walker, who has gone public, and he needed a urology appointment, and it turned out he did have cancer, and because there was a delay in his appointment, his cancer spread. He then had to, have really invasive surgery. Thankfully, he's cancer-free, but if that had gone on for any longer untreated, there could have been a different outcome. And also he's had a massive intervention that he didn't need to have. He has ended up having time off work and had to have a battle with ACC. So that's had a huge impact on him. And we know that particular department has got real staffing stresses. Lots of other examples. So, people who've had surgeries that have just been repeatedly cancelled and sometimes without communication. And so my office has had to intervene to get those surgeries to actually happen. We're getting people who can't even get onto waiting lists. So in the gastroenterology department is one where people are getting letters saying, we the waiting list is too long, so we can't even put you on the waiting list. There's a lot more examples. A young woman, Amy, who also went public, who's had issues in terms of pain and hasn't been able to get enough referrals to be seen. So it's just we get people coming into my office very frequently who can't get access to medical care.
Nelson's been hit by repeated weather events, and this year in July we had more floods. How's everyone getting on? What's the response been by the government, and how's everyone feeling at the moment about the recovery?
Yeah, so actually the response from the government's been pretty good, and when these events happen, we actually just all try to work together, muck in, and get the job done. So we had some devastating floods in Nelson City in 2022. These floods were out in the Tasman area, so completely different area. However, it still has an impact. Both events have impacts on the whole region, and it's the same civil defence group. So it's the same people involved in the immediate response and that recovery. It's really tough. In parts of Tasman, you've got, farms and primary industry businesses that are intergenerational, that have been in generations, for such a long time in terms of a family. And there's a question for some of them about whether they'll continue or not, because if they've been operating right next to a river that is flooded, it does become a question of, is it going to be safe to continue operating here for our business? Probably the area where the biggest issue is the lifestyle blocks. So people who've moved out there and said, yeah, I'm going to have a little lifestyle block, maybe plant a few things, maybe have a few sheep, a couple of cows, and just doesn't seem worthwhile to continue. It was a pretty stressful event. And the rivers, honestly, the devastation just going and actually seeing some of it in the aftermath is just horrendous. And so there'll be huge patch-up job for all the local roads. So, yeah, I mean, my observation is people are really resilient. I kind of hate that word because it sort of feels a bit glib. But I also don't think we can underestimate the impact on people of having multiple events. And so that's something that Aucklanders will understand. Rain anxiety. Aucklanders will understand that. People of Tairāwhiti understand that when you then have another heavy rain, that fear. And like after the 22 floods, I had a lot of people contact me in the coming months when there was another heavy rain who were really, really, really worried. And so there probably does need to be better work around mental health support, I think. Our local health community have got really good resources, but I think it's probably more of a conversation about that nationally around mental health support after these events. And look, it is climate change in action, and it's you've got to be mindful, I think, immediately after an event that people are in the throes of an event, and that's the last thing they need to hear, right? But I think if later on we need to be honest. These events are happening because of climate change, and people's property is getting smashed up, and their lives are being put at risk, and these events are going to become more and more frequent. And so, not only do we need to be thinking about where we're building, how we're building, is our infrastructure fit for purpose to help prevent flooding. There's actually only so much of that you can do, because Tasman in particular is huge in terms of its land area. So you can't, stop bank your way out of all of it. You can do some more work, I think, to improve the flow of the river and where it's going and the gravel and things like that. But again, if the river comes up as high as it did, there's actually only so much you can do to stop that. And so, yeah, it's time we take climate change seriously. And again, this government's rolling back so much of the work we did. You hear Shane Jones yell out in the House last week, time to leave Paris. It's like, actually, the cost of not acting is what we see in, my community. And, we did lose a life this time. And livelihoods and lives being at risk and people's lives being upended. It's a real impact.
What is the National Party doing about climate change? When Shane Jones does these kind of theatrics and plays up to his small base, what's National doing?
Well, I think National's just letting New Zealand down massively. So one of the frustrations we have as a Labour Party is that there are often areas where we can get bipartisan support across the centre of politics. Yes, we're a centre-left party, so we're going to have a left-wing approach. They're a centre-right party, they're going to have a centre-right approach. But there's some things we need to agree on, and if there's a little bit of tweaking around the edges, we can live with that. But we need some genuine agreement around some of those centrist things. And what we're seeing around National at the moment is they've just got ACT and New Zealand First out to the side, basically controlling everything. So it's not a John Key, Bill English style National Party. And I think that's a problem for New Zealand. Like, Christopher Luxon needs to actually step in and on some of these things actually be willing to reach across to us. So if you look at RMA reform last week, we ended up voting against RMA reform. We were voting in favour of it, but a whole lot of last minute changes came up and that prop up the mining industry. And so actually when it gets to that, we can't vote for it anymore. And that's where actually if National's having problems because they're getting pushed around by ACT and New Zealand First, talk to us. And that's what Todd Muller did with James Shaw, and of course we were involved as well. But when, all of the climate change legislation came through, that was genuinely cross-party, bipartisan work. They need to talk to us and basically just shut ACT and New Zealand First and their kind of climate change denial stuff out, because it's just too important for New Zealand.
So when it comes to your overall view of this government and what it's doing and the outcomes that you're seeing, what is that view? And don't hold back, just tell us what you think.
Oh, it's just an outrageous National Party. My grandfather was a member of the National Party and stood for selection for the National Party. I hope he wasn't alive when I got elected. I hope he'd be okay that I'm a Labour MP, and I'm staunchly Labour. But actually, we can't have this situation where we're going like this all the time on policy and on things like infrastructure, things like our hospital builds, health areas, but RMA reform, stuff like allowing the Treaty Principles Bill to even reach the Parliament. This is actually not a centrist, moderate National Party, and they need to be looking deep into themselves and saying, who are we and how do we stand up to ACT in New Zealand First? They have to do that for the sake of the country. And I think it's one of the reasons, people who moved voting for us, voted for National, are now starting to talk to us again, because that's what we have to present. We have to show New Zealand some stability, some vision as well, not just we're going to cut that because Labour did it. The ferries are a classic example. And in the South Island, the ferries just been a debacle. We've sunk $671 million into basically a vindictive approach from Nicola Willis, where she cancelled the ferries because she didn't do it. And in the meantime, we've just retired Aotearoa, so we don't have rail-enabled ferries at the moment. A whole lot of workers have lost their jobs, and we're not going to get the new ferries. We were going to get them next year. Now we've got to wait till 2029. So we've got to change the government next year, right? It's actually urgent, and we've got an opportunity to make this a one-term government, and we've got a huge amount of work still to do, I think, to get to that point, and we're doing that work. But, I'm getting people coming to see me at my market tent every week going, how can I help? We've got a fundraiser next week that's sold out already, which is unheard of. People are coming to help. They're actually wanting to deliver leaflets, knock on doors, because they're just so over this government, taking New Zealand backwards, making huge promises to New Zealanders that they're not delivering on. And we just cannot afford another 3 years of National.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for joining us today. Your words are resonating, I'm pretty sure, out there. Everyone's sick and tired of it, a one-term government. We're going to vote them out. Thank you very much. And look, we'd love to talk to you again before the next election, more than once. So thank you very much for joining us today, and all the very best to you and to Nelson.
Thank you. And it's been great being here in person, and very keen to come and talk when I've actually got policy to announce. So it'll be exciting.
Look forward to it.
Welcome to G News, the good news.